Hello, everyone. Hello, hello. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. We appreciate you being indoors on a beautiful summer evening. Just a couple notes of housekeeping before we get started. If you need a restroom or a water fountain, those are through the art gallery, into the arts and music department, and to the left. If you need an exit, through the art gallery to the right. Our helper here is handing out handouts, so if you did not get one earlier, you can flag her down, or I'm sure we'll have extra copies at the end as well. We're here in the Calvin Coolidge Presidential Library and Museum, so if you would like to walk around the space after the event, and if you have any questions, come let me know. My name is Priya. I'm the head of adult services here at Forbes, and I coordinate our programming, so if you'd like to see more like this or other types of programs, please come chat with me after the talk tonight. One quick note about Forbes programming, it's supported by the Friends of Forbes Library, who support all ages programs and services at the library year-round. If you have any interest in getting involved with them to support library programming like this and so many others, please come talk to me afterward as well. And that's enough of that, so let's get to our presentation. We're welcoming Robert Comeau from Historical Tours of Greater Holyoke. And they do tours of canals and mills, churches, cemeteries, all of these historical sites that we have in our communities and want to learn more about. Tonight we will be learning about canals in the Connecticut River Valley in Massachusetts, and it's going to be really cool. So with that, I'm going to welcome Robert. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, it sounds very ambitious to have canals around, and why would you need them? And when did they come in? Well, I can only cover a few. 11 years ago when I started doing tours and presentations, I said to myself, there can't be that many canals around Massachusetts. I live very close to the Holyoke Canal. It's enormous and hard to beat. But there's probably not too many more, and I guessed at that time, maybe there's about 80 around Massachusetts. Oh, that was my guess. Well, now I think there's about 120 just in western Massachusetts, and if you go through all Massachusetts, that means it might be up to 300 canals of various types. A lot of them are gone, but they're so important for our history, and especially this year, it ties in very well because this year is the 250th anniversary of the Revolutionary War, and that actually ties very well into canals. So I applied for a state grant through the Massachusetts Cultural Council, and they said, yes, you can talk about canals and give tours about canals. I had been doing it for 11 years now, and I wanted to expand it. Now, there's 4 types of canals. My website has every tour I've ever given, including every canal tour I've ever given, and has a lot of explanation for these different types. The first one ever hit the Connecticut River Valley of Massachusetts is a navigational canal. And the name of that was the South Hadley Navigational Canal. In 1794, it was the first navigational canal within the United States, ever. And the instigation was George Washington. Whether he was a general twice and then a president, he always wanted canals. He said during the last of the French and Indian Wars, this country is so hard to get around, and he was so frustrated, not only by transportation, he was also frustrated with the British. He actually quit that war early. But then later, the American Revolution came around, and again, he said to himself, we need canals. When he was president, he said, we need canals. But during your lifetime, federal governments have a lot of money. During his presidency, they didn't have much money at all. So he could not do a thing about that. All right, now other types of canals, well, you could have irrigation canals, but around western Massachusetts, as you probably can guess, you don't need them too much. We're not out in California where it is very dry. We get enough water, and only a few irrigation canals are around. How about canals from reservoirs to bring water to where people are so they can drink? Think of Quabbin Reservoir. Sure, you back up the Quabbin Reservoir, but you also need to carry the water to Boston. And they do not do it only by tunnels and pipelines. They do it by aqueducts and also canals. And then there is the most common one, the power canal. Okay, and look at that little note I put. And that might surprise you. You might know there's canals around Northampton. Some are still around, but 12 power canals are in Northampton. And during the 1800s, these were built, 11 of those along the Mill River. And even when you're outside Northampton, say in Williamsburg, you have canals, of course, because mills did not have electricity in the 1800s. You had to use mechanical power. All right, so I mentioned this is a Massachusetts Cultural Council project, and these are other sponsors. They're on your sheet I gave you. And also on that sheet, Holyoke Preservation Trust, for 11 years, they have promoted and hosted me. And whenever I'm outdoors, they usually have a person show up. They also have an art show, a garden tour. And notice, I've been here for 11 years, and they've existed for 11 years, because one of the persons on there, about 50 years ago, when she was just out of college, she taught my sister, and my mother knew her. And I happened to have met her 11 years ago, and I introduced myself, and I knew her name. But this is what I do. I do parks and streets and mills. This is probably an 11-year time. This is probably event number 250 I've given. All right, and this is my more recent schedule coming up, especially on the canals. So I'm going to be doing a Chicopee Center Canal tour for the 5th year in a row. And I'm also going to we'll give a presentation for the 4th time in 2 years of the 6 power canals on the Chicopee River. And every year, for 11 years, I have a different group be my charity. So if people want to donate $5 or $10, I tell them my charity this year happens to be Providence Ministries. And it's also the 150th anniversary of the location where they are at, Providence Ministries, is where the Precious Blood Church of Holyoke is located. 150 years ago, the worst disaster in Massachusetts up to that point happened. In the year 1873, 70 people died in Holyoke in one fire in a church. They got trapped, and the church had no protections against fire. Within 10 minutes, 70 people were dead. The next year, a flood happened in Williamsburg that went much higher than that. All right, and acknowledgments are here. I do a lot of work in libraries, and I mention all these canal types, and I'll stress very much the power ones. You might know Holyoke and Lowell have canals, very big ones, but there's different kinds of power canals, and I'll point those out as we go through a few of them. The ones that you probably know best are when the canal goes behind a mill, and then the mill has tunnels called races, and they put the water through that tunnel, and inside is a turbine, and there's an engine room in the mill, and the water falls onto the turbine and makes hydromechanical energy. All right, but there's an early type of canal, which was actually the birth of canal power in anything within the United States. There's one at the Slater Mill in Rhode Island. All right, so we're going to cover municipal canals. These are canals that bring you water to drink. And around here, we have quite a few very big ones, and I want to show you just a few of those. This one happens to be at the Ashley Reservoir within Holyoke, and And the Ashley Reservoir includes 2 ponds that were raised about 8 feet by putting dams on them. And you had to get the water into Holyoke by either tunnels, pipes, or canals. And what they had to do, since Holyoke is in the direction about northeast of this, the main body of Holyoke, they had to get the water out of that top pond. But there was a half-mile worth of rock ledge in the way, sheer rock. To get through that, 1873, they didn't really have a good way that was safe. So they had to use explosives like gunpowder. They had to use anything but dynamite, because that was not invented, and dynamite's whole goal is to make explosives safe. So a half mile, and it was about 10 feet deep and about 10 feet across. So you can imagine, easy to build the dams on these 2 ponds, but very hard to get through that ledge. And this was the best place to put a reservoir. About 20 years later, the whole thing was changed over so drastically that you cannot even see the canal anymore. It was called a rock-cut canal, and what they did, they put a 10-foot wide metal pipe within it, and then covered the entirety. And that was the end of that canal, turned into a tunnel. The same thing happens in Ludlow. Springfield's second water source ever. The first water source was on 2 rivers in Van Horn Park in Springfield, but they made a much bigger one in Ludlow. And they named it the Springfield Reservoir because they owned it. It was in Ludlow. It's still there. It's still used as a backup. And you can see there's actually water coming from the side. It's called Broad Brook, coming along the side. But what they did, they connected what's called open canal up to the Broad Brook, and they brought the water right in. They dammed it up in a couple places, and then had one spillway with wastewater off to our right-hand side, which puts it back into the Broad Brook. But the pipeline that goes into Springfield is towards the left-hand side. It's over here, and then it goes underground through Ludlow, Chicopee, and into Springfield. Nowadays, Springfield has an enormous reservoir out in the Berkshires, and so this is now just a backup. Okay, and this one is just a very quaint. It's called here the Hatfield Aqueduct. What they did, they dammed up a brook, had a little reservoir up top there. They made an aqueduct, which is above ground structure, which holds the water inside this channel. And they bring it inwards onto a street called School Street, and they come to these 2 schools. Why didn't they just build a well? Well, this school here was a school that was so big, and you're so close to the river, they weren't sure if the water was going to be pure enough. So they put up an aqueduct. Now, I couldn't get you a picture, so look with this one. This one's in India, right? About 25 years ago, I was kayaking on the Connecticut River, and I was in the northern part of Hatfield, and a farmer had dug a canal like this that probably went about 200 yards inwards towards his farm, and it looked very much like this. And so he must have had a bulldozer cutting through, and he also would have to get water rights from the state to do this. But most cases, this is not necessary. Okay, maybe in Hatfield he was on a dry patch. Maybe he just wanted, it was so easy. Hatfield is so flat that this is easy to do. And it only works during the high water points like April, May, and October, and you get water in. Yes?
Yeah, I was going to ask the question, was the water source coming from the
Yes.
So, the Connecticut River being high, this being lower in elevation, so it was a natural flow.
It was a natural flow, but they made sure the entrance was not too low because it'd probably taken too much water for the farmer. And I doubt he had any way of stopping the water, so he had to take it during certain times of the year, and that's all.
There wasn't any mechanical means to push the water.
I couldn't see anything, so it was hard for me to see. But this is the only one I've ever seen of irrigation anywhere in Western Massachusetts. Maybe they were more common 200 years ago, off of brooks, for instance. But they're not entirely necessary around Western Massachusetts. You know there's enough rain most of the time. Okay, now, the navigational canal. And look at that Saleh Falls Canal, first United States, 1794, it was all ready. And why bother? Well, the Connecticut River had, by 1790's term, two very important cities on it that would be Hartford and Springfield. And they wanted those locations to grow bigger. And so, how do you navigate up the Connecticut River? Within Connecticut, it's easy. In fact, up to Enfield, it's very easy, very wide river, very deep. But once you get to Enfield, it gets a little tougher, but not much. Once you get to Massachusetts, it gets a lot tougher because there used to be two waterfalls on the Connecticut River in Massachusetts. And in Vermont, there used to be one big one also. So they wanted to cut canals so boats could go around those. So in 1794, private companies started to give out money to these locations. They could see that Springfield and Hartford were in a boom stage. And the reason why, 250 years ago, the British controlled the 13 colonies. By the time we finished that war in 1783, we decided not only to have a revolution in terms of war, we had a revolution in politics. We decided to become a democracy. Now, democracies allow people to make their own decisions. And so for the first time in the world in a very long time, you had people that could make their own decisions, including businessmen. And one of the goals would be to get power, but also to navigate these waterfalls in these rivers. So there was a freedom that opened up an economic revolution, and we call that the American Industrial Revolution. We made it even better than the British Industrial Revolution of the 1700s. And it worked. Everything worked. The goal was to bring food and other goods that farmers in Massachusetts on the Connecticut River, in Vermont and New Hampshire on the river could bring down to Springfield and Hartford. The goal was not to bring much back upstream because these farmers were very, very self-sufficient. But items did go upstream nonetheless, but mostly it was to make Springfield and Hartford's population better, not to depend upon the farms of Connecticut so much. So you can get suburbs around those two cities, and that's what happened. It all works. And look at the last line. The fifth of the canals that went up this river was finished by about 1812. And this inspired the governor of New York State to put a canal in New York State, the Erie Canal. And the goal of the Erie Canal was to get goods across the state and then into the Hudson River where you could navigate entirely, and then down to New York City. And that worked. But they finished in 1825. He got his inspiration from the Connecticut River, which was the first river in the United States that had navigational canals. Okay, and this shows you the years and the locations for those 6 canals. They were canals that had to go inland a bit. and in most cases had to go about 2 or 3 miles, especially in the lower 3. And the ones in Vermont and New Hampshire, they're a lot shorter. Okay, and look how they just exploded. 1794 and the 5th one up. By 1810, you can now reach to the point that has a green dot on the very top. That's a place called Barnet, Vermont. And that's 280 miles from Long Island Sound. So you had 6 navigational canals, now made the Connecticut River navigation very easy. It took only 2 weeks to go upstream, and it took 1 week from Barnet, Vermont, on a flatboat to reach Long Island. That's incredible, whereas prior to that, it took 2 months using the river plus roads to go around these waterfalls. And that's what the boat would have looked like. You would have had up to 20, 30, 40 tons of goods on this ship, and they mostly use poles and sails, except towards the end, when steamboats came around. If you made your steamboat very narrow and very short, in fact, it had to be 15 feet wide only because the canals were built at 16 feet. And the locks, which raised the boats, was set at 75 feet, so they had to make these boats 65 feet long. But still, you could have steamships go up. All right? And all that way, 288 miles from the Sound to Barnet. And they were blocked there, so they had to stop. But all of that, 6 canals were 13 miles long, 44 locks were used, about 6 feet lift per lock, right? Half the elevation change of the Connecticut River in its entire length was done by locks. And this lasted from 1794 until the 1850s, at which point trains took over. Now this is in South Hadley, and it still is. If you go to South Hadley Library, go into the big park that's below the library, and down a set of steps, and you'll find these are locks going upwards from the point that the park brings you out over to a lookout, and this is down. This is lock number 1, 2, and 3. Locks 4 and 5 were filled in. So you still have a look at locks. There would have been wooden doors that closed at an angle, and you would open them when a ship was coming your way. And this is what the door looked like. A fragment of one of those doors still exists in South Hadley at one of the upper locks. That would mean it's 200 years old and it's still in place. Okay, these are the 2 gatehouses because in South Hadley you didn't have just one canal. You had a power canal. That outer gatehouse was for a power canal, and the inner gatehouse is for the navigational canal. You'd have to open these big gates and let the boat pass through. And the other picture shows you inland. If you look, you see a little notch in what looks like an island. It's really a cove. That's where the canal is. And lots of the canal is still visible. It's 2.5 miles long, and about 1.5 miles of it is easy to recognize. Okay, but trains came around, and industry changed. The Holyoke Canal wanted to build a new dam, and they wanted to allow the South Hadley Navigational Canal and Power Canal to still work. And they put a notch on the South Hadley end of the Holyoke Dam, and they allowed those 2 canals to keep operating. The navigation one up to 1862, the power one up to 1977. And these are some of the mills that were along that power canal. Okay, the next navigational canal up the river in Massachusetts was in Montague. And basically the upper part of this, where it says ferry, that's Turner's Falls area. But you can see a yellow line, that's the Montague Navigational Canal. And you can see they're pointing out these black structures. Each black structure stands for two doors separated by 75 feet. And so there were locks, 3 locks systems here, 4 more here, 2 more there, and there was actually 1 more over here, total of 10 locks, to lift the boats through the falls of Turner Falls, which in one place was 30 feet. Overall, in over a mile, it was 60 feet waterfall. Okay, now, you might know of this canal, the Hampshire-Hamden Canal. In Connecticut, it's called the Farmington Canal. Now, remember what I said, on the Connecticut River, they had 6 canals. Total length of all the canals was 13 miles. And they enabled boats to go up the Connecticut River 288 miles. New Haven, Connecticut was one of two state capitals. There were 2 state capitals in Connecticut in the early 1800s. They competed against each other on who would get bigger and bigger. Hartford had the Connecticut River with all the farmers upstream bringing their goods down. It was getting big from 1795 up to the 1820s at an incredible rate. New Haven got very jealous. They dug a canal that was 86 miles long for just a canal, right? They couldn't use a river to help them navigate. So they dug in the earth, about 4 feet deep, about 16 feet across, 86 miles long. And it was not straight because of terrain and because of big rocks. It took a long time to dig. And it went all the way up to Northampton. But they dug it for the wrong reason. The competition dug it for the right reason. They knew that they could make a profit, and they did. The lock tenders, the canal tenders, the freight boat owners, the farmers in Hartford and Springfield all got extremely rich. When they built the Hampshire and Hamden Canal, no one basically used it. They got 10% return on their money, whereas the one on the Connecticut River, every one of those canal companies became, even in 1800, millionaires. Even the freight boat owners got very rich. But they made this one for the wrong reason. They were envious. And if you're trying to run a business off of envy, you're not going to succeed. You run it by profit motive. Okay, so these are some of the power canals. We're going to leave and go into the last kind of canal. There's a lot of them. These are just some of them. I've counted up 120 all through Western Massachusetts. I have not bothered to count the rest of the state. Most of them are very small. Some are enormous. And in the very beginning, this is what they used. They actually used undershoot wheels. Then they started using overshot wheels, where the canal itself, what's called the head race up there, would be higher up than the wheel, and they'd shoot it towards the wheel and rotate it. It was connected to belts and wheels and other gears, and then inside the mill, you would have motion. The motion of water, it was called hydromechanical energy. On the bottom, you collect the water again and bring it out back to the river, called a tail race. So you had head race, tail race, basically a canal system. Okay, now these kind of wheels were not very efficient. And so they started to change. These kind of wheels were used around New England right from the 1790s, but they would change drastically from 1838 to 1845. And that changeover happened on the Lowell Canal system. And what did they change towards? They changed towards turbines. You could drop water onto a metallic turbine. It would spin, it would hit the fins of this turbine, spin them, and then the water would pass through and go out. You could have the water come in by a drop, or you could have the water come in horizontally. It didn't matter too much because of that flow of water. And this is what the big canals did around Massachusetts. The Lower Canal and the Holyoke Canal, they used these. And so now I'm going to go through a few of the canals very quickly, but then when I get to the bigger canals around the area, I'll go a little slower. But look at this canal that was built in Ware. It was called the Otis Canal because the company was called the Otis Company. They made cotton. The Ware River is on the top and the Ware River is on the bottom. Its natural route is right through this right-hand side here. But you put a dam up on that river, and the Ware River would then flow off to the left to what's called a gatehouse. And you would open your gates when the mills were working, and in would flow all the water. And you'd put your mills right alongside this big canal. This whole entire left portion is a canal. It happens to also have a reservoir on it for storage of water if it ever gets low. But all the mills down here and all the mills in the middle would have basements with engine rooms, and the tunnel of water come in, would collapse onto these turbines, and away you go. It would collect back on this river going through, and so all these tunnels were going right through here. You can't see those. Okay, this is one of the oldest of the not very sophisticated canal. Look at all the water going all over the place, not under control, but it was good enough. And look at it, it made a canal village. The worker homes are off towards your left. They put in parks and churches and cemeteries and schools, and away you go. You have now a canal village. In Cummington, I was kind of shocked when I went through all the data they had. They also, in Cummington, which is one town west of Goshen, they have 12 power canals. I think they're all gone, but they used the Swift River that's out there. There's actually two Swift Rivers in the Connecticut River Valley, and this is one of them. But they used here the canal water, and they made very, very short canals. So you don't have to be big, you can be short. There's one up there that they brought inland towards a mill. There's another one right here, and there's another one right there, right? They would use that long extension of the canal if the water were very low for the day. They'd use it as a reservoir and try to bring more water in. So these are very, very simple canals. Okay, Huntington is another one, very long, and look what they do. Their engine room must be right in the middle of the mill because the water comes in, and then towards the right side is their release of the water. Okay, everything you need to be a mill is around the village, homes, stores, but you also need railroad tracks to make sure you can bring goods in and out. Okay, and West Chesterfield has another one. Here actually you can see at least two there. And then Wales, which is a town out in the very eastern part of Hampden County, tiny town still to this day. But I'm pointing arrows towards every one of their canals. And every one of them was owned by the same company. And they nicknamed it Shawville because every mill there is owned by Shaw. And he had the water coming in whenever he could. A very simple canal system, not very complex, but like Lowell, Lawrence, and Holyoke are, and even the Chicopee River. But it was good enough to get villages going. Now this one, nowadays, could you find this nowadays? Well, can you find Enfield nowadays? No, it's gone, mostly gone. And the same with this one. So I included these two to show you that The Swift River used to have another job back then. They used to have power canals in these communities, Greenwich and Enfield, until the 1920s when the Quabbin Reservoir came around. And this one very close to us, and the person that owned this one, William Skinner, moved up from Northampton where he was a silk dyer, and he got his own business going, and he actually had 2 homes in this location. One of the homes right here survives to this day in Holyoke. He brought it after the flood of 1874. It was the only structure that survived in this village. He brought it to Holyoke when he moved to Holyoke. But this was definitely a canal village. Okay, the mill is right here. It's called the Uquamunk Silk Mill. When he first moved up to Williamsburg, he had a house built that was right here. And then when his family started growing bigger and bigger, he had like 8 children. He moved into this one, and that one survived. But he used to have a canal up there. It's totally gone, of course. It got wiped out in that flood. Okay, and even close at hand, there are on the Mill River of Northampton 11 power canals. There's one more power canal on another river of Northampton, but there's 11 on the Mill River. And in fact, within the picture right here on your left-hand side, the Northampton Cutlery Company still, I think they use that name for their sign, but they're more retail now. But their canal was right here. Then, as it bent around this meander, they built another canal over here, and that was called the International Screw Company. And then another company called the Bay State Paper Company built another canal for themselves over here. You can barely meet the end of it right there, so it goes there, there. Okay? So, over and over again, these mill owners were using the Mill River to get power. And it worked too. Every one of those locations used to have villages around them. Almost all the houses around those locations are actually worker homes that have been there like 170 years. Most of the mills are gone. Some of the canals are still around. In fact, I think about 2 of those up in Leeds are still around if you know where to look. But this one is probably the most famous of all, the Nonotuck Silk Mill. Okay, and they actually bought out this company here too, and they became enormous. They had silk being made over here and over here. You can see the dam up there. There must have been a waterfall there, of course, and it pushed the water out in the canal to the side and then inwards towards the mills themselves. Now, notice this water structure over here. They had this canal with a pipeline going below this mill, and the pipe did not resurface again until it came here. And then when it came over here, it was using it in this mill, and it was also using it in this mill. So they were using water over again twice, which is a start of more sophistication behind what they're doing. So they were using water twice over for power. And here it's a little bit more obvious that they have a canal here. You can see 2 canals actually. This one feeds through here, and then this one feeds into here, this one feeds into here, this one feeds into here. So they're actually, again, using it twice over. Very important because when you get to Holyoke, they're using it 3 times over. Okay, now I include this one within Northampton because most people find this hard to believe, but on the campus of Smith College, you still have a dam, and it blocks up beautiful Paradise Pond, which is not a pond, it's a reservoir. It's a power reservoir. You used to have a canal right where that dam was. So this dam you see in this structure is the dam that you have a great look at when you cross the Mill River over a pedestrian bridge. All right, the mill was called Maynard's, and they made hoes and shovels for farmers. And they had a canal. They pushed water right into their mill, and out it came and would rejoin the Mill River again. All right, and you can tell it's close to a college. Look at the street name, College Street. This was quite blurry, but it shows you a little bit better how the canal came into the mill. They had a fire in that upper portion. And this is the picture. So this is what you would have seen if you were looking at the dam face onwards for the pedestrian bridge. If you look to the right, you would have seen this. And if you don't believe it fits, look how narrow it is. On its base, you can see it's very narrow. From here to here only, right? So this is what was there. And they had the canal going right beneath the mill. And this is what you see nowadays. So the mill would have needed more flat space than what is shown right here. So all this would have been flat. And they filled that in to support the road that comes out here. So when people tell you what a beautiful pond, you can tell them, no, it's a beautiful reservoir. And you can tell them history. It was made to power the Maynard Mill making shovels. Okay, and not only that, I forgot the name of this park, but it's right, if you go to the back of the library when there's no trees and brush around, you can actually see a park down below. And that park hides a secret that there used to be a canal going right through it. It brought the water into the mill, 2 different mills, and put it right through this mill and then outwards. It was a grist mill, and then it was the Horace Lamb Wire Company.
So you're talking about this library?
Yes. If you go to, I think it's still called Clark's Avenue, I think. What's the name of the park? It's like Veterans? Say it again? Okay, Veterans Field. So it's tennis courts and softball fields, so forth. But along the place, right about 10 feet inwards from the parking lot, there was a canal there. But you cannot tell that. It was all filled in when the Mill River was diverted because it was useless. Okay, so now to get there really big, you have to have a more sophisticated canal structure. Notice all the ones I showed you, I didn't try to show you details. They're so simple. But the Chicopee River was used 6 times over for power. The Chicopee River has the most drop within it of any river in western Massachusetts, including even the Deerfield River. It had an enormous drop, and that's why it was dammed up, because it had 6 waterfalls to it. Okay, and this happens to be one of them. It's in Ludlow, and the mills are on the Ludlow side. The near side is actually Indian Orchard part of Springfield. And this is a 1-mill town. All the mills that you see along the edge of the river, all the supply huts going up here were 1 mill. And they made jute and twine and linen. In fact, the Ludlow mills still exist, has a functional company, but they're in Pakistan. They moved away. So this company still has 3 of its upper, I think 4 of its upper mills still in place, and they're being changed to homes or apartments. This mill was the biggest mill in western Massachusetts by far. 5,000 workers every day would work here on only 2 shifts. So about 3,000 something workers in a day shift, and in the early evening, to midnight shift, they'd have another 1,000 or so. All the homes going up there were built by that same company. You see hundreds of homes there, they're all still there. So most of downtown Ludlow was set in place and made by the instructions of the Ludlow Mills. Right? And the Ludlow Mill, look at the date that it was first made, that canal, 1822. All right? And it is in competition. What people think is the earliest sophisticated canal in Massachusetts, which is the Lowell Canal. The Lowell Canal was made in 1822 also. I cannot figure out either one of them down to the month when they got going, but they were both made 1822. They both were fairly sophisticated. And who was really first? Well, Lowell will tell you they are. In fact, they got a national park there now. But Ludlow was a very sophisticated canal system. And this is showing you the dates on all the canals. And I put one extra one called the Red Bridge Canal. It was never a hydromechanical canal, though. But this is that Ludlow Canal. Look at all those mills. From 1 up to number, there would be a number 11 built a few years later, but up to 10 here. 11 will go in here. These were all supply huts along the railroad tracks. 2 dams, right? And you had a wastewater canal and a canal going right through the middle of these canals, right underneath them all, under, and then a new canal going over here. So it was a 2-system canal.
What were they making there?
They were making jute, twine, and linen, very specialized. And they stayed in Ludlow to the 50s. And this is a picture of all the mills and all the years that the last mill put in that place was built. The first one came around 1820. The second one came around the next year. The third one came around the 1840s. They were all gone. But these are the ones that were put in place in the years they were built. Okay, and this shows you mill numbers 1, 2, and 3. And I show this because look at that big hole and look at this rounded structure. When I started researching the Ludlow Canal 3 years ago, people in Ludlow said, the old canal and the old mills are gone. The new ones are around still. So I went on the bridge and I found, look at the rounded structure over here. And there's a square and a round. That is what you just looked at. So I went onto the Potts Bridge and made sure it was January, so there's no vegetation, and I found a portion of mills number 1 and 2. Okay, now even that Montague Navigational Canal would be changed over into an enormous power canal. It did not follow the route of the Navigational Canal. It followed a very river-bound route because it had to be close to the canal that they built for power, had to be close to the river. The Navigational Canal in Montague was very far inland. But they used the first 1/4 mile of it, and they made this gigantic inland canal. So you see the river going out further, but the inland is this giant canal with its own reservoir right on it. Now, to my favorite, the Holyoke Canal, because it's 3 levels, so what are you trying to do? Use the water 3 times. Has anyone ever done that? No. Lowell uses it twice, right? Some of the other simpler ones found ways to use it twice, but no one could use it 3 times until Holyoke built theirs starting in 1848. And here's the finished product on the inland routes. Notice how straight the canals are. And this is a map from 1871, And already it has about 40 mills in place. It would have about 40 more by 1900. It would have 80 mills along the canal using power from those canals and using it 3 times over. It would bring it from the top left, you see a gatehouse, and then it brings it into a canal. The first level canal is on the very top. The second level canal is the one that's U-shaped coming along the river. It is 2.5 miles long compared to 1 mile long on the first level canal. And then the third level canal is this portion down here. Water that went into the first level canal past Appleton Street, which is right here, would be used 3 times over. It would drop from the first level canal to the second. It would drop from the second level canal to the third, right at that node up there. And notice a lot of mills there because the water's dropping. And then it would use it again right here at this node when it dropped from the third level canal back into the river. It would go 20 feet, 12 feet, and 32 feet drops. The water total drop would be about 60 feet. And it would do that over and over again.
Sir,
Yes.
one of the interesting components was that the city of Holyoke was the first planned industrial city. And part of the marketing scheme was these canals, and they would generate and provide free power if a manufacturing facility were located. And even now today, they're generating power that benefits the city of Holyoke, and South Hadley has a much lower generation rate, which is very, very favorable for National Grid or Eversource. Very favorable rates.
Yes.
Almost half the cost of what you expect from National Grid or Eversource.
Yes.
Fascinating experience. And it drops from 100 feet down to 75 feet down to 50 feet, the various canals.
That's right. The mill owners in the 1900, the mill owners made 100 megawatts of hydromechanical energy. That's no electricity. 100 megawatts out of 200 tunnels. So each tunnel with a race with a turbine inside of it would generate 0.5 megawatt times 200 tunnels. 100 megawatts were being made in Holyoke almost the entire day because it had a big Connecticut River behind the dam to supply water constantly. Now, it still makes power. The canal makes 25 megawatts hydroelectric power at 4 medium-sized stations. There's a medium-sized station here, and then also a big one up around there, and then a big one up around here. The river has a dam on it, which makes 20 megawatts. So you see the Holyoke Dam, and you say to yourself, well, that must make most of the electricity. It doesn't. The dam makes 20 megawatts electricity. The canal makes 25. And then there's small little hydroelectric turbines under some of the mills. That makes another 5. And then there's solar panels on the former land of the Holyoke Water Power Company. Holyoke makes 80 megawatts of electricity nowadays. But the whole point is they still cannot beat what the mill owners did 120 years ago. Right? But what they did do, from about 1870, from about the time of this picture, they finally surpassed Lowell. They finally got up to 50 megawatts of electricity, 50 megawatts hydromechanical. Lowell made 50, so in 1870 they caught up to Lowell. More mills and tunnels were built. By 1900, in fact, by 1890s, they were up to 100, which lasted up until the late 1920s. And the reason why I'm saying this is, what was the most powerful human-made structure in the world? It was the Holyoke Canal from 1870 to 1930. Nothing could beat it, including all the coal plants that were being built. They just weren't strong enough. Niagara Falls was not strong enough. And it wasn't beat finally until Niagara Falls built a second giant canal into the bedrock and finally went over the 100 level. And that was about 1930. So the Holyoke Canal was the most powerful item in the whole world for 60 years. And here's the gatehouse still there. It's a third edition, but they all look the same. Right? And this is where the gatehouse was coming in. You got to see the South Hadley side too. You can see how sophisticated 3 levels must have been. It took a designer, engineer, and it took 2 men that had built the Chicopee Center Canal, had come over about 12 years after that and built these canals. Every canal, they're pointed out right here with their spillways going from one to the other. The canals start at about 130 feet across, 30 feet deep. But they're losing water through the tunnels into the mills, which go out into the river. So they're staggered canals. They're staggered inwards, and they're staggered on the base. So by the end of 1 mile on that first level canal, you're already narrowed up to 100 feet across and 25 feet deep. So you staggered on purpose to keep the water level constant. So it feeds every tunnel the same. And no mill is kept short. And here are some of the mills. This one almost entirely is still there. This one almost entirely, in fact, this Parsons one is totally gone. But it was the first paper mill in Holyoke, and it succeeded. And why am I pointing out the Springfield Blanket Company? What did they make? Well, it tells you in the name what they made. They were not based in Springfield. The owner lived in Springfield, had stores there. And he started in Holyoke after a fire in Winchendon. By 1874, I believe, he was in Holyoke full-time. Only one part of that mill is left. But what did they make? Did they make blankets? Yeah. They made blankets, but they didn't make blankets for you. They made blankets for horses. In fact, they made so many blankets every year, and they were in operation for about 60 years, which means, if you know the annual amount they made 1 million blankets a year. So potentially there's 60 million blankets still left for horses. And guess what? I own one. So a woman in California sent me an email in December and he said, "Do you want a horse blanket from the Springfield Blanket Company?" And of course I said yes. She sent it to me. And when I give a presentation on the Springfield Blanket Company this year, I'm going to show the whole big blanket. It was for our workhorse. So the thing is gigantic because those horses were enormous. All right, so any questions for me? What's the blanket? Oh, it's made out of wool. And they have to put oil on it because I think the horse would get agitated by the wool. So they put fine oils on it, and so when you pick it up, it's filled with oil.
On the navigational canals, how they, what was the aspect of the revenue generation? How do they define that, determine how to pay the usage of the navigational canals?
Well,
How do they bill?
they had to apply to Boston to get the water rights, and then they get the money. The Sahib Canal got its money from the Dutch private company, and then they started selling off stocks. The second owner was Ariel Cooley of South Hadley. In 1803, he started out selling off stocks, and a lot of already rich people bought a lot of that stock, and they improved their canal over and over again. The same company owned the Montague Canal, and it was made by the same people. And they got extremely rich off of this canal. There are people that never worked a day in their lives because they bought stock in the South Hadley Canal when young and then never worked. They got rich very quickly.
The engineering of the Holyoke Canal system, was there a particular personality or an engineering firm or group of people that
The-
were behind that, and did they, to your knowledge, have any particular inspiration, or were they learning from other canals in Massachusetts or the region?
Yes, they learned from the mistakes of the Lowell Canal, which had a two-level canal, but it wasn't very sophisticated. In fact, they had to fill a road in with a canal. That's how lacking they weren't sophisticated when they started. But the name is Philander Anderson was the engineer. John Chase was the ultimate man in charge of the whole canal. And then a guy named Charles McClellan was in charge. He was the foreman. They had their own men under them, but they hired two firms, the Delaney firm, which is still a name around this area. In fact, the family, 7 generations later, owns the Delaney restaurant. But the Delaney family put the rocks on the sides of the canal because you could not have soil on the sides. You had to have firm rocks. And then another company, I forgot their name, helped them with some of the digging. The rocks were local. The dirt was not dirt, it was clay. It was turned into bricks, and so you have brick yards in Holyoke and South Hadley from the clay they took out of the canals. And it made the brick buildings of almost all the lower valley. I think that answers your question. Okay. All right.
I'm not sure I'm getting that Holyoke uses the water 3 times. Lowell can only do it twice. Are there ramifications, or is there a risk to using it 3 times versus 2?
When you use it 3 times, you multiply upwards the amount of hydromechanical energy you could possibly get. If you use it just once, you have a canal, then a mill, and you put their tunnel through there, you'll have 1 turbine going, right? Now say that you put another canal to collect that water, but right beyond it is a set of mills. You put the tunnel through another set of mills, you get another use of the same water. And then do it again, and the same water, you push it through again through another set of mills with their tunnels, and then finally goes back to Connecticut River. So you're catching the first drop of the water, 20 feet, then you're catching the second drop of the water, 12 feet, and then you're catching the third drop, 32 feet to the river. If you know the terrain of Holyoke, especially the 2 neighborhoods where the canals are, called the Flats in South Holyoke, the terrain, it gradually, and then it goes down, then it stops, flat, then it goes down again. So you had the ultimate meander. A meander is a curve on a river. You had the absolute ultimate meander on the Connecticut River for power generations multiple times over in Holyoke. And nowhere else on the Connecticut River did you have that. You can't go up and down the Connecticut River Valley and find a better place for power.
So that situation was already in place when William Skinner had his
Yes.
flooded, the 1874 flood.
Yes.
So he's like, oh, let me go there where they have steady water and I don't have to worry about this reservoir up in the woods. So I didn't realize that was already fully established.
Oh, yes.
When Skinner, I thought he was part of the establishment of it, but he actually just took advantage of it.
It was 26 years after the canal was started, most of it was built, and he just came. He was only like the 25th mill owner to come in. So he came in, and they were so nice to him. They gave him a land to live for free. They gave him land to put his mill for free. They gave him the water rights for free for 5 years, and they also gave him a few $1 million to build a new mill. For free, no interest. Pay it back within 10 years or so. Because there was one family in Holyoke that was richer than the Skinner family. And that was the Newton family. They had been there since 1862. They were all millionaires, 4 brothers, and they supported or made or ran out of those 80 mills I told you about. 35 of them were either run, financed, or managed by the Newton brothers. So William Skinner was small fry compared to the Newton brothers, who were kind of like the billionaires compared to the millionaire William Skinner. But you don't hear much about them. Their homes are, 2 of their homes are still there, but they're not museum houses. So Wisteria-Hearst, the museum house, keeps William Skinner's name alive. Yeah.
And Wisteria-Hearst was moved from.
Yes.
I remember seeing the pictures of the flood, and it's this big structure, but I didn't recognize it.
Only the residential part is the original. There's a music hall, so that's not the original.
I'm a little confused. I've been looking at ponds around the area, and some of them were created by mills. But I kind of don't understand. Like, is that because they had to build a dam to make those mills? I guess that answers my question.
The most important thing about a canal, where to put a canal, is a waterfall, because you have that push of the water happening right there. So even though you bring it into a canal, that water is flowing very fast in the canal. So you need a waterfall, but you need a dam to push the water into the canal so it doesn't go into the main body of the river anymore. You want it under your control, so you put it into a canal. So you get the push, and you have to back up the water. That makes a reservoir. And when people say ponds or lakes around Massachusetts, you're probably 95% sure it's really a reservoir.
Right.
Okay?
Created in that manner.
Yes. For instance, there's 4 reservoirs in East Hampton, but people call them lakes. And they're very visible because they're on these major streets. Montgomery College has 3 ponds, and all the students think they're gorgeous ponds, but they're really reservoirs. Smith College has, not a pond, a reservoir. Almost everything you think of as a pond in Massachusetts is really a reservoir.
Yeah, I was looking at Damon Pond, which is totally man-made, and then I found out part of Lake Loyola was expanded in the same manner.
Yes.
That was pretty crazy.
Okay. So thanks for coming.